I'll do exactly what I just said, and then I'll let you take it over, man.
All right, sounds good.
Here we go. My man Tyler's going to let us know as soon as we're live, which we may already be. Cool. All right, I think let's get right into it. So welcome everybody to Discussions by Domain. Today we have Nicole and Brad from Birch Benefits, and they are going to do a complete takeover of Discussions by Domain. And I think they're just going to interview me this whole time. So I'm going to get swamped with questions and we're going to get after it. So maybe Brad, Nicole, you guys can introduce yourselves to the audience and then let's get into it.
Yeah, it's a hostile takeover. So we pull no punches here, but really happy to be here. And Anthony, thank you for having us and for your time here and for everybody that's out there. So quick intro. So my name is Brad Hamlin. I'm a benefits consultant at Birch Benefits, along with my colleague as well. Nicole Cornelia is also benefits consultant here at Birch Benefits. And as our hostile takeover will lead to here, our guest of honor of the host of the Discussions by Domain podcast, Anthony DeGraw. So Anthony, how are you today? How's it going?
I'm doing great. We were just talking before we went live about just the nature of cybersecurity and how, I just feel like we're under constant attack with the Colonial Pipeline, and you got the meat packer the other day. I mean, it's just constantly in the news. And as we're going to talk about today, even in your world with the Department of Labor and what you guys play in business-wise every single day, they're making more and more and more things compliance, regulatory focused. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, never more front and center. And I think, Anthony and myself and Nicole talked about this before. Our promise to everybody here is to keep this short, impactful, and sweet. I think everybody has been through their fair share of cybersecurity webinars over the last year. So we'll make sure to keep it focused, entertaining, hopefully, and direct. So the topic that we're really going to discuss today as it pertains to cybersecurity is the new legislation or really it's guidance that was put out by the Employee Benefit Security Administration, the EBSA, which is a branch of the Department of Labor. So it's significant in the fact that it's the first time that they've ever issued this type of guidance. On the flip side of the coin, like I just mentioned, it can be viewed as a check the box item in that literally every branch of government or organization has put out some type of cybersecurity guidance over the last year as our working and living environment has increasingly become more digital. However, just as Anthony was listing before, it's a good and timely reminder about what we as individuals and organizations should be aware of and putting into place in terms of best practices. So let's get into the guidance. And then from there, I'd love, Anthony, to get your take on some recent events and some of the things that you were alluding to. So in a quick definition of what this guidance was, the Employee Benefit Security Administration, the EBSA of the U.S. Department of Labor, issued guidance for plan sponsors, fiduciaries, plan participants, and plan beneficiaries on best practices for reducing internal and external cybersecurity risk. This is the first time in EBSA history that such guidance has been issued. The guidance was broken down into three basic parts. So cybersecurity program best practices, tips for hiring a service provider, and then online security tips. So as I like to call that, good cybersecurity personal hygiene, right? So let's just dig into it. So the first part, Anthony, was the cybersecurity program best practices. It was broken down into 12 different best practices. So let's go through each one individually in detail. Just kidding. Anthony,
can you name them all, Brad?
Yeah, exactly. If you wanted to just give like a high level overview of what was included in that portion and really what you found most impactful, what would your take on that be?
Yeah, absolutely. And for reference, I have this open in the background, so I'm not just citing these from memory, because to be able to do that across all these different regulations would be nearly impossible.
Right.
But the basis, the cool thing about almost all of them is they all just copy and paste from each other, right? So the big one that really shook the game was actually out of the European Union, called GDPR. And then basically California just took GDPR and made it the California Consumer Protection Act, right? Now you have other states. New York had their Department of Financial Services. Everybody is taking a version of it. The Department of Labor did the same thing here. And there's other organizations within the federal government that are starting to do this. So they all are almost the same. They all are talking the same language. They don't want to reinvent the wheel. The other thing is that they also ask for some items that are just easy for them to check off if a company has it or not. So what I mean by that is a lot of times you'll see in these findings, and like number one, have a formal, well-documented cybersecurity program. They give no insight into what that actually is. But you know what they're getting at, the root there is if somebody in their field has an issue, the first thing they can ask for is, what's your documented cybersecurity program? And they're literally just going to say, do you have it or do you not? Right? That's how they're looking at it, because they're not engineers. They're not cybersecurity focused. They just want to see documentation. And a lot of the problems we see existing in cybersecurity, especially with companies that have these strict regulations and compliance standards they need to make up for, is they focus almost so much time on putting policies and procedures together with their attorneys and compliance folks that when you actually, that looks great, right? That cybersecurity program looks amazing on paper. But then what does the actual execution of it look like within the organization? So one of their findings on here too, or one of their standards or best practices, is have a reliable annual third-party audit of security controls. And they also talk about annual risk assessments, right? And this is a big piece of what Domain leads with all the time. Even for our own clients, we have clients that are publicly traded companies. And just by the nature of the SEC, we have to bring in outside third parties to document and check all of our work. And so we also then talk about that with others, right? There's a lot of times, and I think we're starting to get to the break now of managed service providers like ourselves, or even internal IT. You can look at us almost interchangeably, just who we are employed with, are really protective, right? We can't let anything go. You can't get into our environment. That increases risk. At the end of the day, we have to be open. We have to let third parties in to double check and triple check and compare against other best practices of, are we doing the right thing? So out of all of these items, I mean, my main thing is that's a great place to start. Right. Bring somebody in from the outside to just understand what's going on from an objective third party. And Brad, Nicole, I'll pause there because I could go on forever, but let you ask any follow-up questions and things like that.
No, my follow-up question was going to be where you see gaps. So it sounds like, in summary, a good plan is pivotal because it does check the box of some of the regulators, but it's really the execution of the plan itself and the auditability of the plan that you put in place that's going to make it impactful for an organization to actually protect themselves and do what the plan is supposed to do. Is that a good summary?
That's a great summary. And we can kind of pivot into some of these others, which are going to answer your gap findings, right? Like real quick on that, when using outsourced providers, it could be cloud, it could be managed IT service providers, there's managed security service providers, there's all different frameworks of this coming out now. I would say you really, and we're seeing this, is you really got to evaluate those providers, right? We are crucial to, let's say Birch Benefits is a client, full disclosure, here we go. But we are crucial to that network. One, so you guys can be productive and maintain what you guys need to do. The other thing is so you can protect your business and your clients' data so that you're looked at as a valid third party that's at the top of the operational maturity scale. So that's where I think it's crucial. How can you do that? And we're going to talk about, looking at third parties and how to evaluate them. There's different things you can do there.
Yep. And I think that's a perfect segue. The second part of that was obviously tips for hiring a service provider, right? And I love this part about it because it's a reminder that it's not only your IT or security provider that you have to be thinking about when you hire them. When you're evaluating a 401k plan sponsor or benefits broker or even a payroll HRIS system, you should be asking questions and thinking about what systems they have in place, what vendors they work with, and have they appropriately vetted the security protocols of those orgs, or at minimum, at least ask the right questions. So is that a good high level overview of that portion of this guidance? What are some key components in the guidance that you would like to highlight? And again, where are some gaps in that process for like vetting those third parties and what their security protocols might be?
Yeah, number one is, hey, can I look at one of those annual risk assessments? Can you share that with me? Probably have to sign an NDA. Absolutely fine. Highly worth it. The second part of it is, are they complying with anything? For instance, domain goes outside of what we need to do, and we get what's called a SOC 2 Type 2 report done every single year. We invest thousands of dollars to have a third party come in and completely rip us apart. And the cool thing about the Type 2, there's SOC 1 or SOC 2 Type 1, SOC 2 Type 2. This is all done by the CPAs. The cool thing about that is they, on your behalf almost, even though we're paying for it, is they are coming in and they're reviewing all this documentation, but then they back it up with actual screenshots and are you doing what you're saying in your documentation? So that's the key. The reason we went down this is a lot of the financial services firms that we work with out in New York City or community banks, whatever, they even require this as a minimum standard to even get in the door with them. Because of the regulations that they're under when they outsource work. So that's a huge one. Now, the problem with managed service providers, and I can speak from experience here, we're in a peer group of companies with about 600 of us across the nation. And I was out in Denver or Phoenix, and one of the presenters asked, how many of the MSPs in the room, which there was probably 200, let's say at the time that this was going on, have a SOC 2 Type 2? And there was 5 that raised their hand. Wow. Right? So this is a big gap for when a company like a Birch or any organization, right, of small to even mid-market size is looking for third parties. That's one of the top criteria you can ask for, and they may or may not have it. Now, it's up to the organization to determine, do we really want to require that or not? But I think cybersecurity is getting to the point where it's like, it should be almost a minimum standard that your provider that you're relying on so much has this in place.
Right. Right.
The other thing I would look for in a third party is their insurance. So speaking to your guys' language, just on the other side, on the P&C side, right, is do they have cybersecurity insurance for breaches that they cause or gaps that they cause? And you can get a copy of their declarations page and understand what that is. And maybe even have your own cyber insurance broker or P&C broker review it and say, is this enough for what they're handling for me? Right.
Right. It's great insight. Anecdotally, I appreciate that, the visual of the amount of folks that were at that conference and who has that type of compliance in place. That's, great takeaway. And the final part, and just as we move along here, as I referred to in the beginning, that personal cybersecurity hygiene, I think just really great reminders and tips for us as individuals, just because just like anything else, but particularly as it pertains to security for an organization, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? So I think constant training and making sure everybody's on the same page about best practices is so critically important, especially nowadays through COVID. I'm sure you have the statistics of how many more phishing attacks have happened since the onset of COVID. So what's your take on the guidance there from that personal security hygiene standpoint? And what do you think is most impactful? And then on the flip side, what do you think is most overlooked?
Yeah, so I'm gonna even take this like to an organization hygiene, and then the employees and users within that organization will have their own things. So number one, this has to be looked at from the top down.
Yep.
The executive team has to be aware of this, has to fully support it, and then has to educate throughout, right? It is the worst scenario in the world where the CEO of the company won't install multi-factor authentication because it's one additional step that they don't want to take, but yet makes it mandatory for everybody else in the organization to do it. So number one, it starts at the top and works its way down. The second thing is you can't punish mistakes, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is if a user in the environment, Brad or Nicole, raises their hand and says, hey, I clicked on a bad link by accident. They got me, it went here. I don't know what happened afterwards. You can't punish that. In fact, you should do the opposite and incentivize people to do that, right? So where we get to is that, and we've talked with multiple companies about this, on the technology side, for what we do, we can get you to 90-95% secure. We can put 1,000 layers in place, right? You could buy cybersecurity tools all day long. There's millions of them out there, but it's still only going to get you so secure. The next 5 to 10% is on what we call the human firewall, which is everyday users like Anthony, like Brad, like Nicole, right? Where we can protect ourselves, where we'll take an extra second to hover over a link in an email to see if it's really where it wants me to go. Or I'm going to take a second and say, is this really Pat from Birch? And I'm going to hover over his email address because it just looks completely weird. And then I see like, oh no, this is a variation of this. This is spam or phishing or whatever. Right. So that's the human firewall. You can get at that. And one of those best practices by the DOL, I think it's number 7 on here, is very specifically training your users, doing active phishing campaigns to them to see who clicks, who fails, and then incentivizing them doing the training and just repeating it. And actually, just to give you guys some numbers, when we roll out like a cybersecurity awareness training and phishing campaign, the first time we roll it out in an organization, almost 80% of the users will fail. And then what happens is you get that nice report, everybody goes through their training, and then the next time we do it, it's like 40%, and then you do the same thing again, and you get down to 20 and 10. And the crazy part is you'll never get to 0, right? Which is almost the scariest thing for business owners is like, I really want to get to 0. You will always, even domain, we had a past employee that moved on and retired, but we had a past employee who every single time we sent something out, clicked on the link.
Yeah.
So you'll never really get there, even if you're a cybersecurity company.
So actually, I want to take this to the next level. I'm just going to jump in. So we pass sensitive information back and forth, with the census, claims data. If there is a breach in security, how would you, as an organization or HR professional, really communicate that with your employees? Like, what do you think the best steps would be, or really the most important piece of that communication?
Yeah, so I think the most important piece is like everybody's on an understanding that you guys handle this type of information, especially the people you're talking about, HR, executives. I don't remember all the terms from the industry, but you're handling all those different pieces of information, health information, social security, maybe even payroll and paychecks and direct deposit information of your employees. I mean, the first step is acknowledging we have this information and we really have to protect it. The second step is then having a clear program, SOP, how those employees can share it and who can they share it to. And then finally, where are they allowed to store it? There's a big area in cybersecurity called data leak prevention or protection. And it's basically like sometimes these organizations they'll have a file server, so your old school server where documentation lives on. You'll have Microsoft and OneDrive. A lot of companies will go out to another third party like a what is it called? Dropbox or other solutions. And all of a sudden you're looking at this organization from a 3,000 foot view and their data is living all over the place. So Nicole, to answer your question, one, the talk about cybersecurity and the data, the type of data we have. Number two, where am I allowed as an employee to store that data? What's the appropriate place? And then number three, how am I allowed to share that securely? Some people use things like data rooms or private secure locations that's the only way we communicate with our clients. Others will go on the encrypted email angle, where if I'm sending this type of information, I have to make sure I check off that's an encrypted email to the other side. There's multiple different ways. There's no right answer, but those are the three areas I would think about when handling that type of stuff.
And is this, so in this world, so is this something that Domain would really help their clients with? I know that, you put different systems in our place, but do you come in and kind of perform that audit to be able to say, hey, this is probably the best way for you to, communicate that information with vendors as well as your employees?
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The one angle on this, though, that we can never, it's very hard for Domain to help handle. We can guide, but at the end of the day, the organization has to make the decision on is a lot of times we're just dealing with a nonprofit and the users get so used to, say, a Dropbox, but then they also have Microsoft 365 and OneDrive and Google Drive, right? And like the users are just in love with Dropbox and they're scared of the change. And what we have to try and do our best there is educate on, we really have to lock this down in one environment. I use the bank example here. So I'll use like a reference that I typically talk about is, think about the old days. Like a bank just starting out was one physical location, right? And I have my money in my vault, which is behind all these secure doors and all this different stuff. I have fire systems, alarm systems, cameras, all that. And I got one location I need to protect. Then what happens is, the next iteration of my bank is I want to grow. So I bring on multiple different, banks or community banks in different locations, right? So now I have to protect all of those. Same concept, but now my geography has expanded. It gets a little bit more difficult. Now you get to the modern day version of banking, which is also, I have all these locations, but then I also have online banking. So I have to secure these locations, but now I also have to secure my client's money in the cloud, wherever that may be, right? It just starts to add all these dynamics. So if you take that and replace banks with, document storage or file storage, you can see how rapidly I could have file storage in my office. I could have file storage on my computer. I could have file storage on my network server in my office, and then I could have file storage in all these different cloud locations. And to try and protect that is extremely difficult. So what we try and educate on is bringing everything into one standard pot and applying the same security principles all the way across the top, which then affects everything that's in there.
Great. No, really
awesome. Well, Anthony, I in our quest to keep this short, succinct, and impactful, I think there was a ton of good takeaways. Not the least of just to make sure that we're asking the right questions. We're staying up to date on guidance and current events, and ultimately just having good partners and good folks that we can reach out to and ask questions to. So I know that you folks have been really good partner to Birch, and we're excited to continue that. So just thank you for your time. Thanks for your insight on this particular guidance. And if anybody has any questions or wants to reach out, where I know this is your podcast and your website, so I'm sure they know where to reach out to you. But why don't you just give people a place where they can reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to touch on one thing before we move on, which, Brad, you mentioned, we were kind of talking prior of the recent events. You got the Colonial Pipeline, you got the meat packaging facility, and you're going to continue to have more and more. And in fact, our cybersecurity team responded to more incidents, like actual breaches that happened via third parties in the first quarter of 2021 versus the whole 2020. So the activity is like just through the roof, right? But the root of all of this is something simple, and it's a tactic everybody can employ, which is just multi-factor authentication.
Yep.
So very simply, when somebody knows that I can go to office.com and use a username and password from anywhere in the world, that becomes a huge security issue. And the problem is that most people's usernames are their email addresses tied to their Microsoft account or their Google account. It doesn't matter. The second aspect of that is the password. And people love passwords, people hate passwords, hate changing passwords, all of that. So what happens is it becomes completely standardized, right? And I use the same password every single time for personal stuff, for work stuff, all over the place. And not to mention, you can go on the dark web and find just millions of records of passwords. They're there. My password's there. I can guarantee Nicole and Brad's passwords are out there. They're just there. They exist. And people just want to like think that doesn't happen. It really does. So if I know, if you think about this from a high level, if I know I just have to go to office.com and I know Nicole's email address and I can go find her password because it's somewhere out there or variations of an old password and I can try those, then I can get into your Microsoft account from anywhere in the world. And that's legitimately what happens every single day. And that's exactly how these attacks happen. Now they happen on what's called a VPN network, but it's the same concept of username and password to get into it. And nobody does that multi-factor touch. So the number one recommendation I would have to all organizations is you have to deploy multi-factor authentication across all cloud services, not just email, not just your online, I don't know, maybe you guys can give me an example, like your online benefits portal, like Bamboo HR or whatever, your ADP of the world, right?
Okay.
You have to deploy it across everything because they will get in and that's how they do it. And these hacks primarily happen because of lack of multi-factor authentication. So anyway, that was that. And then maybe you two have questions off of that. So let me pause.
I actually think you did a great job. I know the biggest thing whenever I really talk to my clients or different HR professionals is always really about, the communication behind things. And like you said, putting in a great, a great set of rules, regulations, guidelines, but actually the execution part, I know it's important. And HIPAA, it's funny, on the 1 out of 10 organizations are actually non-compliant with their HIPAA regulations. And it's not due because of the policies, it's due because of the communication that they're giving out to the employees or the communication to the vendors. So I know that's a big part of it. And it's something that we really, take on board ourselves, and Domain helps us out in that sense with the different secure, communication and pieces. So I think out of, anything moving forward, like you said, taking this is really is part of the execution is a really important part of it more than anything.
Absolutely.
So I
and
appreciate everything.
Yeah, it speaks to Birch's, like I keep using this word operational maturity, and I want to speak to it about Birch, right? And why we partnered with Birch as well on our benefits, right? There's very few there's organizations out there that think about business and moving their business forward differently than others. And for Birch specifically, they looked in the mirror and said, this is a key aspect to us, not only protecting our current clients, but going out and winning new clients, because new clients are going to have issues with other providers and they're going to come around and they're going to say, how do you handle cybersecurity in your organization? And guess what? I worked with Hong on making slide deck on how Birch is actively protecting themselves and their clients. And to me, that whole word of operational maturity speaks to you guys. And in this sense, I would say bigger isn't better, right? I know your guys' competition is some of these larger, big brokers that are out there, right? And that's always going to happen. But just because they're bigger does not mean that they're better in these senses. It actually could mean the opposite, because it's just so fragmented. They've done so many acquisitions, just stuff is all over the place. And it speaks to, Birch and what you guys are doing. And even the two of you coming on as benefits consultants to talk to me about these new standards, I think speaks volumes. So great work to the entire Birch team, and thanks for taking over the discussions by the podcast.
We'll do it more often. Don't you worry.
Awesome. Nicole and Brad, thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, it was great seeing you.